but I've been anointed king.
Did you really think you could just come into my house and take what is mine? I am the prophet, and I am the king. I do not fear you, but me should fear.
Hey everybody, welcome back to these Behavior Revolution scriptures. And that was a big episode. Last one, wasn't it, about being hot or cold? And if we're lukewarm, Yahusha will vomit us right out of his mouth. He can't stand the indecision. He can't stand, what was the word? Passive. Being passive. Gutless, lukewarm, slimy little skunk. You won't make up. You're just sneaking around, pretending to be this, but you're not. You know, make up your mind. If you don't want to be here, don't. If you don't want to follow Yahusha, don't. If you do, then run. That's what he wants. Hot or cold. The decision is everything. And so today we're going to go into very interesting, I don't know if you know this word or not. If you've come from religion, you probably know this word. Ichabod. What does Ichabod mean? Look at your screen here. Ichabod. Back in the church, it was the glory's gone, the glory's gone. What's going to happen? The glory's gone. The esteem has gone. Or as we like to say down here, Yahusha's just buggered off. So, Ichabod, when Yahusha buggers off. In our last episode, we saw Samuel growing up, becoming a man, having a good reputation, and what he was hearing. I just did a video a few minutes ago about this, the thing I'm going through with Christopher, and seeing that he's been hearing and doing, just quietly to himself, hearing and doing, practicing for many years, and I've just ignored it and ran him down and cut him down and hated him inside myself, didn't want to look at myself and what Yahusha wanted from me, and just so stubborn. Anyway, Samuel, back to the point, Samuel is going through this as well. He's got these two idiot sons of Eli that are treating everybody like garbage, and Eli himself. So he's growing up in this ridiculous fake system, you know, and this is where we're up to in the story. The Philistines were a seafaring people. Before we go into the story, let's just discuss our next major enemy that's come onto the scene. The Philistines. Let's talk about them for a moment. The Philistines were a seafaring people who came from the area of the Aegean Sea. They were well known in Egypt and caused them much trouble, even caused Egypt much trouble. And their label as the Sea Peoples was written into Egyptian records at the temple of Ramses III in Thebes, approximately 1200 BC. So they're up here. This is the Philistines up here. They're sea people because they're on the coast. And I've got footage of that from that movie we binge watched it last weekend. It's called Kings and Prophets, all about King David, and that's where I've been getting all this cool Hollywood footage from. So the Philistines, they settled all up and down the Mediterranean coast from Egypt to Canaan, and were a very serious threat to all the indigenous tribes and nations of the coastal regions. The Philistines were warriors, as opposed to Israel that were farmers and herdsmen. But that doesn't mean they were simply warlike savages in character and Israel were peace-loving hippies. Not at all. It's just that the Philistines, like most nations, had a fully formed government with a standing army, and Israel didn't. Of course, Israel had a national army when they first entered Canaan over 300 years earlier. Under Joshua, they had an army back then, national army. They all came together, unified. But it dissolved only a few years after the initial victories were won, and sufficient control of Canaan was achieved. And now Israel was just a small militia of civilians that armed themselves and came together as needed and when called. So we'll see today that it was these folk, these simple Israelites that came together occasionally, it's these folk who went to fight against the well-trained, experienced and professional Philistine soldiers in the battlefield. Why? That's still a mystery. So let's go into Samuel chapter 4. Samuel's now a man, remember? And he's been getting a reputation for hearing and doing and becoming a prophet, because what he says comes true. So, one day, the Israelites decided to go out and fight the Philistines. Just like that. They set up camp near Ebenezer, and the Philistines camped at Aphek, making a fierce attack, defeating the Israelites and killing about 4,000 of them. When the Israelite army returned to their camp, and the elders said, "Why did Yahuwah hand us over to the Philistines today? Let's get the ark of the blood covenant witness from Shiloh and carry it with us. Then Yahuwah will help us and rescue us from our enemies." That's just what they thought. Get the ark. It's interesting, this is interesting actually, it's interesting that the mindset of the elders was that Yahusha himself had defeated Israel. Not so much the Philistines. To them it was neither chance nor the Philistines' might, but rather that Yahusha was displeased for some reason and was directly responsible for Israel's great loss that day. Discussed this in the last video, or possibly the one before, that these people just assumed that it was Yahusha doing everything, good or bad, whether they were obedient to him or not in their behavior or worshipping other idols as well, irrelevant. They acknowledged the fact that good or bad, there's no chance, no coincidence, none of that BS that we go on with today, not Mother Earth or the universe is telling me. No, it was all the Creator, their Elohim, was making things good or bad. And we can see that here. Look, they get back and they've been slaughtered, basically 4,000, and the elders aren't having a pity party. They're like, "Why did Yahuwah hand us over?" Like it's his fault. But at least they're acknowledging that they've done something wrong. So we better get the ark, because if we get the ark, he'll come to the party then, because it's his precious ark. Get the ark and then Yahusha will show up. That's what they thought. So it's interesting that they thought that it was Yahusha that defeated Israel, not so much the Philistines. To them it was neither chance nor the Philistines' might, but rather that Yahusha was displeased for some reason, was directly responsible for Israel's great loss that day. Apparently, they hadn't sought Yahusha's counsel before going to battle, and he certainly didn't initiate it. They went to battle, they went to war in the Promised Land without Yahusha telling them to. Remember the definition back in Joshua? The definition of a set-apart war is that it's Yahusha's war. He started it. He tells you what to do, and he'll win it. Yeah? And the spoils are then his as well. It's under the ban. So they didn't even ask his permission what he thought, whether they should do it or not, as a true set-apart war should. And so now, after the fact, they thought it would be good to consult and involve him. Wow. Does that sound familiar to us? How often do we boldly head out, having our own way, certain that our ideas are well conceived, rational, and must be in harmony with Yahusha, only to run into a brick wall and fall on our faces? And only afterwards do we then take the time to speak with him and seek his guidance and decision and actually follow what he says. What's wrong with us? What's wrong with you? So you can see it's the same behavior. They brought the ark from Shiloh, and here we go, we're about to read about that. So the army sent some soldiers to bring back the ark from Shiloh. Remember, that's where Eli is, at Shiloh. Bring back the ark from Shiloh, because Yahuwah of hosts, there's that statement again. Yahuwah of hosts dwells between the cherubim on top of the set-apart ark. And as Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, brought the ark into camp, the army cheered so loudly that the ground shook, And the Philistines heard the mighty noise and said, "What the hell are those Hebrews shouting about now?" Little side point here. Under normal circumstances, Eli would have accompanied the ark. Remember, this wasn't just a physical war, it was always a spiritual war too, they thought. Set apart war involved the priests carry the ark, do all that jazz. They didn't do that the first time and they were slaughtered. So this time they're going to try and do it the right way. So they're taking the priests. Bring the priests and bring the ark so we'll win. Under normal circumstances, Eli would have accompanied the ark, but he was too old and blind, so his sons went instead. But what did they expect from the arrival of the ark to the battlefield? They're all cheering and jumping up and down. Yay, the ark's here. They just assumed that if they had the ark, they had the presence of Yahusha. They just assumed. I'm just having a little light bulb moment now. They just assumed that if they had the ark, they had the presence of Yahusha. Now don't forget, as we go through this, the ark is us, because there's no other dwelling place on the earth today where Yahusha's spirit, his anointing is. It's us. It's these physical vessels, our hearts, portals open. So they just assume that if the ark showed up, that Yahusha shows up. Don't just assume that just because you show up and you're an immersed believer that Yahusha's walking with you. You got to check your behavior at the door. You got to make sure that you're flowing with him, that you're anointed, that you're checking your thoughts, that you're walking on his word. You get what I'm saying? Let's move on. So they just thought, we've got the ark, Yahusha will be here. In fact, the ark to their minds, this was interesting, was a visible sign of his presence. The ark was a visible sign of his presence, and that was his doing. That was the whole point of the ark. It was a shadow of what his people would become. But what the Israelites pictured in their minds about how Yahusha operated was similar to how the other societies thought their deities behaved. Why? Because it was usual for a nation to bring an idol into the battle and turn the whole bloody affair into a war of the deities, just as much as a battle of soldiers. Then the winner would assume that their deities were greater than the deities of the losers. So the Israelites felt that the presence of the Ark of the Blood Covenant would, without a doubt, grant them victory. And at first glance, the Philistines felt the same, because when they heard the shouts of the Hebrews and the sound of their shofars rising into the skies, the Philistines grew worried. They knew that the cries of joy from the Israelites could mean only one thing. The Elohim of Yisrael had shown up. But had he really? Let's consult the text and find out whether Yahusha had really shown up. Then the Philistines learned that the Israelites' ark had been brought into the camp and was scared to death, saying, "Now we're totally screwed. It's all over now. Nothing like this has ever happened to us before. Who can rescue us from these powerful deities who made all those horrible things happen to the Egyptians in the desert? Philistines, be brave and fight hard, for if you don't, those filthy Hebrews will rule over us, just as we've been doing to them. So fight and don't be afraid." I'm not going to read all the bits in the comic book things. That's just for the kids and anybody who likes the graphic art. I like all this artwork and stuff. You can follow it along. And the Philistines did fight. They fought, mate, killing 30,000 Israelite soldiers. And the rest who survived the massacre ran off home with their tails between their legs. Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's wicked sons, were also killed that day. And the precious ark of the blood covenant witness was captured by the Philistines. So it's all gone down. They lost, even though they had the ark, they lost the war. 30,000 Israelite soldiers massacred. Those who made it ran home. Hophni and Phinehas killed on the same day as that random guy, the man of Elohim, who went and told Eli that "you fired, Yahusha's done with you." Most importantly to them, the ark was captured by the enemy. How's that going to go down? So, in case we read past it and you didn't pick it up, I kept it the same as the original text, because they say, who can rescue us from, this is the Philistines, they say, who can rescue us from these powerful deities? Plural. Why are the Philistines referring to Yisrael's Elohim in the plural? Why would the Philistines refer to the Yisraelites' Elohim as deities, assuming they had more than one deity? And that's in the text, they said that. The obvious answer is that they thought everybody had multiple deities, and so naturally Israel did too. But the Philistines had been rubbing shoulders with the Hebrews for decades, probably at least a century by the time of Samuel. So why, after all this contact between Israel and the Philistines, wasn't it common knowledge for the Philistines that, unlike any other existing society or nation, Israel only acknowledged one Elohim? Even if the Philistines didn't know the particulars or found such a thing to be rather laughable, they were certainly aware of what happened down in Egypt, and there had been plenty of intermarriage between Philistines and Hebrews, even though Yisrael's leadership discouraged it. So there was ample opportunity for the Philistines to hear about Yahusha. So what gives? Why are they still thinking this way? There's multiple deities in Israel. Because there was. The sad answer is that Israel was so dysfunctional and casual in their lifestyle of following Yahusha that they made no impression on their neighbors at all. Instead of Israel influencing the Canaanites and the Philistines, Israel began to look a lot like the Canaanites and the Philistines. Instead of him delivering them from Egypt and setting them up like a city on the hill, a shining beacon to the rest of the world as an example and a witness of Yahusha in their camp and what's possible for all the nations, which was the plan, no, they just became like the other nations. Polytheistic. So, instead of the Philistines understanding that the Israelites recognized only one unique and all-powerful Elohim, they saw nothing special or terribly different about how Israel went about their lives. They looked pretty much like everyone else. We have been constantly learning of how the people of Israel erected shrines to various deities, gods and goddesses, building Asheroth on high places and adopting pagan worship practices and mixing it all in with the worship of Yahusha. Idolatry was running rampant, not just throughout the common folk of the 12 tribes, but also their leadership and even the Levite priesthood too. So, take all this on ourselves, guys. Is your behavior just exactly like the world? I'm not talking about being set apart in your clothes and in the way you your religious beliefs and going out there and telling people I'm different, I'm set. No, I'm talking about your actual behavior. Your habits, your lifestyle. Is it set apart? Are you being set apart? Or just like the rest? Would anybody, if they spent time with you, notice, feel, pick up on anything different about your behavior? Your mood, the feeling that surrounds you, or just like everybody else? This is the true behavior, guys. This is what we've got to look at. The death of Hophni and Phinehas on the same day was the sign that Yahusha, through his unnamed random guy, had told Eli to watch for. That's the sign that Eli was to watch for. Hophni and Phinehas dying on the same day. And it just happened. It was the unmistakable sign that the end of the house and priestly line of Eli had arrived. But at the same moment, the irreplaceable ark of Yahusha was also captured, and together with the death of the two high-ranking priests who had accompanied the ark, it became proof to all of those present that Yahusha had finally had enough of this degenerate people and disgusting priesthood. Yahusha had withdrawn from Israel lock, stock and barrel because the leadership was so insane and deceived that they actually thought they could force Yahusha to fight a fight that they wanted fought. A fight in the manner, the place and the time of their choosing, simply because they transported a gold-coated wooden chest to the battlefield, as though Yahusha is some lucky charm or just another pagan deity. Getting this? Yeah? Oh, we can't judge. We've not behaved any different in our lives, have we? Bringing Yahusha with us along for our plans, assuming that he'll do this and he'll do that. And many a time he has, in our ignorance, patiently bringing us to a place. But once you know, no, you're not falling for that. Once he's brought you to a place of maturity where you know what he expects of you, it's expected. So they just lost the battle. Ark's been confiscated. Hophni and Phinehas are dead. That same day, a soldier from the tribe of Benjamin came running from the battlefront to Shiloh, screaming the news about the battle. His clothes were torn, and he'd put dirt on his head to show his sorrow. And when everyone heard his news, they broke down and began to weep. Eli the high priest had been so afraid that something might happen to the Ark of the Blood Covenant that he was sitting on his chair beside the road near the wall of the town gate, waiting in anticipation for news. He was 98 years old now and blind, but he could hear everyone crying. And he said, "What's all the hullabaloo?" Then the soldier hurried over and told Eli, "I escaped from the fighting today and ran straight here." "What happened, mate?" Eli asked. "Yisrael fled from the Philistines. Thousands of our people were killed, including your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. But worst of all, our precious Ark of Yahuwah's blood covenant was captured." That was the icing on the cake. When the man said that the Philistines had captured the ark, Eli fell backwards on his chair, and because he was a very heavy old man, the fall broke his neck and killed him instantly. He had been a leader of Yisrael for 40 years. That's the end of Eli. He had been a leader of Yisrael for 40 years. From the shock of the ark. Then the wife of Phinehas, remember Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's two wicked sons that had just died? Well, the wife of Phinehas, Eli's son, was also about to give birth. And soon after she heard that the ark had been captured and that her husband and his father had died, the shock sent her into labor. And the birth was so hard that she was dying. But the woman taking care of her said, "Don't be afraid, dear. It's a beautiful baby boy." But she didn't pay any attention. She was stunned by the loss of her husband, her father-in-law, and the ark. And she cried out, "Ichabod! Ichabod! Call him Ichabod, because our esteem is gone. Yahuwah's buggered off. Ichabod! He's gone! He's gone! The Elohim of Yisrael left our country when the ark was captured." This is what she's crying out while she's giving birth and dying. "Ichabod! Ichabod!" In Hebrew, Ichabod literally means, "Where is the esteem? Where is the power, the portal, the presence?" Referring to Yahusha, of course. Religion says glory. Where's the glory? The glory's gone. "Let your glory fall." Oh, how many songs did we sing about that? Let's look at it deeper though. It literally means, "Where is the esteem?" Similar thing to what Adam and Echah would have experienced. Remember the thick esteem that covered Adam and Echah like a thick blanket of warmth in the garden? The loss of which made them feel naked to the core. It was Yahusha's esteem that would appear above the winged cherubim of the ark. It was the interdimensional doorway of connection in the tent sanctuary that gave the place its value and meaning and set apartness. So with the loss of the ark, the resting place for Yahusha's presence, the esteem was literally gone. And we might look back and go, well, this is a bit silly for them to feel like this, knowing what we know now. They didn't know what we know now, and Yahusha didn't appear in every Tom, Dick and Harry in a portal on their hearts after they repented and been immersed. No, he only appeared on the ark, apart from the odd random every once in a blue moon occurrence where he'd appear or show up or speak or in a dream or punch Jacob in the hip, you know, the odd thing that he showed up here or there, but it was always on the ark. So literally in this time and this era of history, if the ark's gone, so is Yahusha. So they didn't know what we know, that he's outside of everything, all time and space. He can do anything anywhere. He doesn't need an ark. But as far as coming into the dimension, he kind of did by his own universal principles of clean and unclean, light and dark, because if you just came in any random spot, people would be frackled up. So with the ark gone, the esteem was literally gone too. This is interesting. We can skip over this event too fast and not realize the enormity of what losing the presence of the ark meant to the people of Israel, and why Eli and his daughter-in-law both died virtually from the overwhelming shock of learning of it. What's the big deal? These two guys basically died of shock just from hearing that the ark had gone. Even though outwardly Israel had syncretized their daily lives with the nations around them, behaving just like everybody else, for the people of Israel, losing the ark meant that Yahusha himself was gone. So, if Yahusha was gone, then the one who established their blood covenant was gone, meaning it was no longer valid. So what? Well, so what if the blood covenant's gone? They're not obedient to it anyway. No, it's not. Grasp this. If the blood covenant's gone, what was the blood covenant again? The blood covenant first established with Abram, when he first came out, crossed over, went on the journey with Yahusha. The blood covenant first established with Abram, renewed through circumcision with Abraham, continued through Isaac and Jacob, renewed again at Sinai with Moses as an everlasting law, and then renewed again 40 years later with Joshua, going into the land as a working legislation and lifestyle. It's renewed all the time, lifted up every time it's re-explained or worked out. This is the blood covenant. Well, this blood covenant, what's the big deal? This blood covenant was Israel's national identity on earth. Their national identity on this earth. It's what set them apart and made any of their history mean anything. Even though they weren't behaving set apart, they believed they were set apart. Why? Because of their history, because of Abraham. Their whole national identity was wrapped up in Abraham and his blood covenant. They were the only nation on earth that was circumcised, That's probably not quite true. Other sons of Abraham were, and other races from Abraham were circumcised, but you know what I mean. They were physically different as well. So it's what set them apart and made any of their history mean anything. Even though they had no standing government or physical king, status or power, Yahusha's promises gave their everyday lives meaning and purpose. They were in this land because of this blood covenant, because of the promise coming out of Egypt. So if Yahusha had buggered off and his blood covenant was no longer valid, as they thought, then all rights to their land, inheritance of Canaan, as given to Abraham, ceased. You've got to remember, they've moved into someone else's land, it looks like, because there's Canaanites in there. And they've conquered it, and they're taking it back, assuming it's theirs. You can't move into someone else's land and assume it's yours, unless the creator of the universe has told you that it's actually his, and he wants them gone, and you're going to do it, and he's going to make sure you win. You know what I'm saying? Those words, those promises were all part of the blood covenant. And the blood covenant was sealed of the tabernacle, the ark, the presence, the esteem, everything. It's all wrapped up. So if the ark's gone, the esteem's gone, Yahusha's gone, the blood covenant's gone, and they have no right to be in this land. Starting to get why this was such a big deal to them. wasn't so much a spiritual issue, it was a where are we going to live? But let's also notice that Yahusha has now taken drastic action to change the course of redemptive history in Israel. He's just taken drastic action to change the course of redemptive history in Israel. How? All in the same day, the people of Israel were punished for centuries of ever-increasing lawlessness and idolatry by losing 30,000 of their men in battle. Massive punishment that day from Yahusha. What else? The priesthood was emptied out, and those in charge, Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were also dead on this same day. And the power behind the priesthood, the esteem of Yahusha, and the ark, the sign of Yahusha's esteem, were entirely removed from Israel's possession. Meaning the tabernacle no longer had any purpose or meaning, because the one who used to dwell there and gave it purpose and meaning has abandoned it. And the place of the empty tabernacle, Shiloh, was now just another cult site, not much different than any other ritual site that the pagans used. And from here on out, Shiloh stopped having any spiritual meaning for the Hebrews. You don't hear much about Shiloh after this, because after the priesthood was disbanded, there was really nothing else going on there. The ark was indeed a magnificent sight, and it was also Yahusha's footstool when he chose to inhabit it. But Yahusha was hardly a genie imprisoned in a bottle who was shuttled around merely to do the bidding of his human masters. We have been advised in numerous scriptures that when Yahusha wished to speak to his people, he would appear in the most set-apart place and hover above the mercy seat, the lid of the ark. And apparently, what arrived at the battlefield was just a golden box, devoid of the divine presence. And so Yisrael was slaughtered to the tune of 30,000 dead. But even worse, the two priests set to attend the ark were also killed. Yet that paled in comparison to the Philistines' capture of the ark of Yahusha. The shock of that news was so great that it caused Eli to tumble over backwards from his chair and break his neck, and for his daughter-in-law to be suddenly seized with premature abnormal labour and die in childbirth. So that's the story today. The mercy seat, the ark. And this is all part of going along in the story. Ichabod can relate to us a lot in our lives because there's a reality and there's a delusion that goes along with Ichabod. It could be what you're listening to, believing that Yahusha's actually gone, when today we know you've got to do something pretty heinous for him to abandon us, because he promises never to leave us. So if you're feeling so dreadful, is it because he's left you? Or is it because he's flogging you? How does it feel without the love of Yahusha? We all know the devastating darkness of not having his divine esteem and open portal access within our hearts, don't we? We all know it. Is life worth living without him? Yahusha left Yisrael, eventually divorced them, and vowed never to return to man-made structures ever again. And he hasn't. But even the blood-bought, immersed bride of Yahusha has the capacity to behave in such a way that offends him, and he won't be among them if they refuse to listen and follow. Of course, this is an individual walk, but remember, half the bride is wise and half is foolish, and we can feel which camp we're in, whether Yahusha is pleased with us or whether he's not. And if you're experiencing Ichabod, you'd better face your truths and wake up quick smart. If you're experiencing Yahusha turning his back, or Yahusha flogging you, or just showing you how displeased he is, this is why I'm saying there's a reality and there's a delusion. Don't go thinking that he's gone if you're being flogged. No, that's not him gone. That's you despising the discipline. That's you not changing. That's you wanting your own way. And if you think about it, he says, every son that I love, I chastise, discipline, flog, goad, rebuke. So actually it's a blessing, because if he had gone, you wouldn't be getting any of that. You'd be free to do whatever you want. But the consequences would be fatal. So we often listen to pesterings, don't we? Telling us, Yahusha's gone. You're alone. The light's not here anymore. All this crap we listen to. He promises never to leave us or forsake us. So it's different to back here. Back here he had gone. He had gone. But let's think about that too. If Yahusha had left Yisrael, just because the ark had, I mean, he wasn't on the ark when they went into battle. So what's to say he was there when the ark was taken? What about Samuel? Samuel's still in there. He's a judge. He's a prophet. Yahusha's still talking through him. So had Yahusha really gone? Just because bloody old Eli and the daughter-in-law of the wicked son, just because they thought he'd gone, just because the people thought he'd gone, because they're too busy looking at a gold box, a relic, had he really gone? Has Yahusha really gone? Or are we just determined to have our own way? If you feel like death, Yahusha's not gone. You've stepped away from him. If you're experiencing Ichabod, you better face your truths and wake up quick smart. There's not much time left. He only accepts the hot, not cold, not lukewarm. Those tuned into his voice and wanting to please him because they're so grateful for his overwhelming love. Run to him and he will run to you. He doesn't change. He does not change. The overwhelming times you've felt his love, his shalom, his peace pumping through you, those times you feel just intoxicated in the spirit, he hasn't changed. He doesn't change. It must have been you that changed. So that's the problem. We change. So that's our study today, guys. He doesn't leave you, but he will let you know. He will let you know. So if he's not pleased with you, you bloody will change.